Okay, so welcome to the fourth session of Oxford Geoheritage Virtual Conference. My name is Lucia Kubalikova and I'm from Czech Academy of Science, where I work on geoheritage and geoconservation issues. And I will guide you through this session. We have talks from different parts of the world, Latin America, Portugal, or Morocco, or UK. I just want to say that there is a 14-minute for talk, and then after finishing all the talks, there will be panel questions where we will discuss the question that you can ask on here on Facebook or in the YouTube channel. So now I would like to invite the first speaker, Carol Guerra, who will present the contribution entitled How Do We Do Geoeducation? So you can, the stage is yours.
Hi, everyone. Let me thank you for the opportunity to share the following minutes with you. To start, I would like to invite all of you to remember one of the first times you've learned something about natural or geological elements that impress you and mark your life. For example, I got very impressed when I was a child and I knew that something like a rock could have existed from million years ago. Well, we are talking a little bit about that, about how do we teach, how do we learn, and how do we build knowledge about geoeducation. My name is Carol. I am philosopher of the National University of Colombia with a specialization in educational science. And I built this talk with Jose, a great friend, geologist, part of the Earth Science postgraduate program of the UNAM in Mexico. Well, as we all know, there are many ways to understand geoheritage and geoeducation. However, the starting point of this talk is obviously explain the way we are going to understand them. So here, we are going to understand geoheritage as the perfect mixture between the pro-geo definition that you find on the left side of your screen and the definition of heritage you have on the right side of your screen. So here we are going to understand your heritage like the result of the dialectic between people and environment, between community and territory, where the environment and territory are constituted by geodiversity elements with geological and identity value, geoelements who are worthy of safeguard. Well, and we understand geoeducation as a part of the environmental education who promotes the conservation of the geological heritage. Well, so geoeducation is completely related with geoheritage, promotes the conservation of the value of the geoheritage, and of course, the conservation of the geodiversity elements concerned to geoheritage. But what is the problem? Well, we have identified two main barriers that make difficult the development of pedagogical innovation in education. The first one is a barrier which has had an important impact of educational science since a long time ago. This is the double gap between theoretical research, empirical research, and practical implementation. What does it mean? There are a lot, really a lot. Believe me when I say it's a lot of studies from psychology, philosophy, neuroscience, and many other disciplines related to educational science who try to explain how do we learn, how do we think, how do we access to the world and environment, which are the best ways to learn. And well, many other questions about something that I like to call epistemological human nature. Even so, it does not exist the same quantity of empirical studies who can try all these theories, now like experiment about these theories. And there are even less detailed experiences of the better way to teach that we can easily apply in pedagogical specific environmentals. This is the reason why, even when theoretical research has proposed many alternative ways to teach, the traditional pedagogical practices still remain in the most of the educational environments. It is not easy to pass from theory to practice, and even less in educational terms. Well, on the second hand, in the specific terms of geoeducation, we find a very important gap. The research in geoeducation is really long away from the geoscience education research. I know this sounds a little weird, but please allow me to explain. So here, you have a view of the development of the concept geoeducation from a search of the word in the Scopus database. We found 90 results from 1986 to till now. We built here a network from the keywords found on the articles related to specifically to geoeducation. Here we can find a close relation with geoeducation, geoheritage, geotourism that is quite bigger than geoeducation. We find also geodiversity, sustainable development, tourism development, and well, this is those are like the keywords related to geoeducation in the 90 results we found in Scopus. Now here we here we have a view of the concept geoscience education from a search in the same database, Scopus. We got 366 results in the same time lapse. We found very different results. Here we have another kind of relations. We relation geoscience education with geology, education, students, earth science, learning, active teaching, educational development. Well, I'm sure you can read all those words. But what I want that you to notice is that the articles related to geoeducation do not have any close relation with methods, curriculum, strategies, previous educational theories, or anything that can explain to us how it is made, how education is built, whose are the subjects, whose are the teachers, while in geoeducation science, geoscience education, we have a clear interest in innovation, subject methods, and curriculums, even a big fight of work in virtual teaching. And then we need to ask ourselves why geoeducation is not related at all with the big field of geoscience education. Why we don't find the relation in the articles. That is what we are trying to show in those two. Yep. Okay, so of course, it doesn't mean that we do not want to say that there doesn't exist any concern of geoeducation in this field. On the contrary, and it has been our principal concern, we believe there is a huge potential in geoeducational practice that we are losing, that we do not register, and that we do not care as much as we should. And the result is that there is not a clear understanding of how do we do geoeducation and how can we do it better in academic community. So what is the missing potential I am talking about? Well, what I'm going to share with you now comes from a long philosophical tradition, phenomenology, and from an emerging field in educational science, embodied education. What I'm going to say now is inspired in the amazing work of Floremir Ceceli, a teacher I had, around embodiment and embodied education. That at the same time, it is nourished by phenomenological research of Maxine Sheets-Johnston and Maurice Merleau-Ponty. They are two phenomenological philosophers. Okay, what am I talking about? Well, embodied education points to an accurate understanding of the embodied, kinesthetic, affective, and located nature of the human learning. We understand that the subject learns the world when she lives the world, that is to say, through its body, its affection, and its possibilities to interact with the other and the others. So, every subject is embodied. She has a body who allows her to have experience. Then learning experience are incorporated in our bodies. It maybe seems obvious, but please do not forget the long tradition who has taken away the body from the mind. So, phenomenological approaches affirm that we can think, learn, interact thanks to our bodies. So, our minds are not separate from them at all. Okay, every subject is also kinesthetic, dynamic. We know that we have a body because we can use it. When we move and when our moves represent our will, we know we are animate human beings. We learn when we approach to see with our eyes, touch to feel with our skin, bring object to taste with our tongues, we listen. The movement of our body is an epistemological gateway. We learn because we move. And we move. And when we move, we understand space and is there when our body becomes real. Every subject is also affective guided. If we want people to learn, we must make sure they wish to learn. Remember once again that moment when you learn something that impressed you. You will probably never forget the learning that touched your heart. You learned by heart. But affective sense is beyond emotions. It is also about aesthetic. Academic approach depends of what results interesting to the scientist and what is not. And it's from there that the scientist learns some sensibility to what it is important for research and what is not. This kind of sensibility is completely affective. We learn what we like and what we not, what we need and what we don't. So we can, for example, use beauty in geodiversity to impress learning subjects. For example, a beautiful mountain will be very interesting for someone to understand why it is in the way it is and maybe to visit it. Okay. So we can use beauty in geodiversity to impress learning subjects and motivate them to learn with their hearts. Finally, every subject is located. Every geodiversity element is located too. We can never forget that we teach to people who has an history, who has a life, who has a will, and then it's easier to learn if the new knowledge has some relation with our life experience. In short, we are completely sure that education has a big opportunity to introduce itself in this emerging field. Please think about your experience in field trips. Remember how you learned to see, touch, and walk around geodiversity elements. Remember how did you made landscape interpretation. Every one of those experiences was totally embodied. Our challenge is not to use our bodies. It is to not forget that when we teach, the body must to have a place. We cannot forget that the subject of education is always embodied, dynamic, affective, and located. Then we will be able to develop new pedagogical strategies that use the body as a complete learning tool. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. And now we will move to Fabio Loureiro, who will present the contribution about UNESCO Global Geopark as a driving force of environmental governance towards geoconservation and sustainable development in Portugal. So,
Okay, so hello. Hello, everyone. So I'm Fabio. I'm a geologist in the Estrela UNESCO Global Geopark. And so the aim of this presentation is to show a bit of what we do in the geoparks and also how geoparks work on geoconservation and on sustainable development. So to start, just to give you a small idea of where we are. So the Estrela Geopark is located in Portugal. So in the center of Portugal, along the Estrela mountain range, which is the highest mountain in mainland Portugal. And on this map, you can see all of the 9 municipalities that are part of the geopark. They are part of the geopark not only because of geological aspects, but also because in these municipalities, the people that live here have a very close connection to the mountain and to the ways of living here in this mountain. And talking specifically about the heritage of our geopark, so starting, of course, with the geological history. So we have a very long geological history, which is reflected in the rocks that we have. We can tell a story that goes from oceans to huge mountains and to the landforms left by ancient glaciers. So this leads to an important geodiversity. But of course, a geopark does not only work on geology, it also tries to show the other aspects of the heritage and also how all of the heritage is connected with geodiversity. For example, aspects related to biodiversity with several species that we have here that are unique in the world. And of course, regarding culture, as you can see in that photograph, so sheep herding is a very ancient and a very typical tradition here in the Estrela Mountain. So this mountain is very important as a very important heritage regarding several themes, let's say. And in our geopark, you can see here is a simplified geological map, but what we have here are basically so meta sediments represented in green from the Neoproterozoic, and then in yellow and in pink, mostly granites, which are from the Variscan origin, so approximately 300 million years old. But when we talk about the Estrela Mountain and the Estrela Geopark, we have to talk about the last glaciation. So we have very important landforms left by ancient glaciers, which shaped the landscapes of the higher parts of the mountain about 30,000 years ago. And the shapes that we can see today are a reflection of how the ice and how the snow shaped all of this landscape throughout millennia. Here, just to give you some examples and some of our geosites which have a very high scientific relevance. So on the top left, we have the Zezer Glacial Valley, which is a perfect U-shaped glacial valley. Also, we have some moraine fields and moraine ridges, which have dates from two different glaciations. So one with 30,000 years age of 30,000 years, and another one with approximately 140,000 years. So that's very relevant. And then on the bottom left, we have some very interesting granite weathering landforms, which developed within the glaciated area and have withstand the presence and the erosive action of glaciers. So these are our most important geosites. When we talk about this UNESCO classification and the work of geoparks, there are several pillars that a geopark must work on. Of course, one of them is geoconservation, so the development and implementation of several strategies, both for the protection of our geosites, but also to find ways to promote, to enhance this geoheritage and to take them to the general public. And of course, that can be achieved by education, so the work with the schools, not only schools from this territory, but also from all over Portugal and even abroad. So education is a very important pillar of the work of the geoparks, but also tourism. So it's important that this UNESCO brand can attract more tourists that come to visit the territory and experience all of that this territory has to offer. And of course, geoparks must work on sustainable development. So geoparks being an UNESCO classification, they must every day work on strategies and ideas to implement the 2030 agenda. So it's one of the main goals is to also help the people that live in these geoparks, because geoparks, of course, they have very important geology, but to be a geopark, beyond geology, there has to be people living here, and this UNESCO classification has to be important and has to bring something for the people that live here. So this sustainable development strategy is very important for the people that live in these territories. And when we work when we look specifically at the geoconservation strategy that we try to implement here, so we try to divide it into two different areas. So on one hand, we try to monitor and implement conservation and protection strategies. For example, monitoring the field, or also using new technologies, for example, drone technologies, to study how, for example, how tourism can affect geodiversity, and also try to work with the municipalities in strategies to protect all of our geosites. But also, on the other hand, interpretation and valorization must be one of the main goals of a geopark. And so we try to work on the improvement of visitation and infrastructures for geosites, so that everyone can be able to see all of the geosites, and of course improve the interpretation, so that everyone that comes can understand what they are seeing and how that is important, and how these geosites tell the story of planet Earth. Because every geopark, it's like a chapter in the big book of the story of planet Earth. So geoconservation must be a strategy that's work, of course, with the different stakeholders in the territory, and must allow also the creation of new strategies that can also help improve and contribute to the sustainable development of these territories. And focusing more on one of the topics about this presentation is the question of lithium. So as we know, and in today's economy and the changing world, the use of electric cars and the research for lithium, it's getting very high. And according to some sources, especially what is referred there, the U.S. Geological Services, so Portugal has the 6th largest lithium reserves in the world, and is one of the largest producers of the matter. But at the moment, what we know is that this lithium is predominantly used in the ceramic industry. But thanks to these high reserves, there were several research programs that were proposed for the opening of new lithium mines here in Portugal, and especially some that coincided with the area of the Estrela Geopark. And here in this map you can see, so this was one of the first proposed areas. So the area in green is a natural park, and that was automatically excluded in the beginning. But as you can see, part of the area of the geopark was within the areas that were proposed for the research and possible new mines for lithium. But as we know, despite the fact that lithium is important for the production of batteries, there are also negative impacts from this exploitation. So in the territory, there was a big discussion, and two things had to be weighted. First, if we really needed these new mines, and secondly, if we needed, or if we wanted the UNESCO classification, what was the most important thing. And as we know, regarding the creation of new mines, that also has an impact on landscape. For example, it can decrease the tourism attractiveness. It transforms the landscape. It has also impacts on biodiversity, noise pollution, especially for the local populations. And sometimes there is not a clear indication of the value and the economic value that these new mines can bring to the territory. So with this in mind, in a consensus that came from several reunions and several meetings with the local stakeholders. So there was a public consultation about these proposed areas that I showed a few minutes ago. And this public consultation allowed everyone to reach the government and to give their opinions about these areas that were proposed. So meeting with everyone in the territory, the final goal and the final decision was that the UNESCO classification was much more important than the creation of new lithium mines. So what was done was the geopark, and since many people could not respond to this consultation, so the geopark worked as a platform to reach out to the government and to show really the negative impacts that could come from these new mines. So as you said there, so the impact in the quality of life, a threat towards some of the geosites and the geoheritage in the territory. These mines did not align with the sustainable development strategy that was being worked on. And of course, geoparks, this classification is not, it is reevaluated every 4 years. So there could be a threat from these mines on the UNESCO classification on this territory. Based on this, so we presented this and the government accepted some of the remarks that we made. And just by almost closing my presentation, so the main goal was to show how geoparks are places that have very important geoheritage, and of course in its geoconservation strategy, it aims at safeguarding and using in a sustainable manner geoheritage, especially using education and tourism as a means to promote geoheritage. And of course, geoparks work not only geoheritage, but show the importance and the connection between all of these elements. And of course, this classification, it's much more than a classification. It's an opportunity for these territories, and usually geoparks come from very rural areas. So it's a new opportunity for the people that live in these areas to find new ways to promote their sustainable development. And just in conclusion, especially regarding the lithium aspect, so as a result of this consultation that was made and the remarks that we made to the Portuguese government, so the area that was firstly in the geopark that was proposed for new mines was excluded, and from that it also resulted that not only in this geopark but other UNESCO global geoparks in Portugal and biosphere reserves were also excluded from the areas that were proposed for the creation of new mines. So you saw a bit ago the map of the territory and of those prospection areas. And just to close my presentation, this is the final result. So as you can see, there can be also lithium mining in some places, which is being studied. But in these UNESCO classified territories, so the sustainable development and the goals for these areas are completely different. So that's why this area was excluded. So this is what I wanted to show with my presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fabio. Unfortunately, next speaker haven't arrived. So I would like to remind that you can still put the question into chat, YouTube or Facebook or StreamYard. And after finishing this session, we will answer them. And now I would like to pass the word to Jack. He will put some videos to fill the time, and then in approximately 15, we will have another presentation from Richard Butler. So see you in a few minutes.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Welcome again, delegates from all around the world. Apologies, we have not been able to get in touch with Abdella Ait Barker, who was going to speak to us about the karst landscapes of Beni Mellal Atlas from central Morocco. Abdella, if you're out there, check your emails. We might be able to squeeze in 10 minutes of a talk. And do use your login link, but we haven't been able to get in touch with Abdella. We want to keep the timetable as it is. So just in case people are tuning in at specific times to watch specific talks, though we're sure everyone is joining us for all of OxGVC. But we thought we'd use the time to give you a few updates and announcements, some things you might have heard, but some things I promise you haven't. Of course, a general reminder that if you have any questions or comments, do put them either in the comments under the YouTube or Facebook videos or on the questions thread on the Discord server. We'll make sure those are all fed through and put to our speakers in the question period at the end. Just to reiterate for those that are just joining us live, we're just doing a few very quick announcements and some updates. There'll be an interesting little video as well before we get to Richard Butler, who's going to talk at 4:20 UK time on evaluating the condition, use and future of the UK's largest dinosaur track site at Spyway Quarry in Dorset. As a paleontologist, I am very much looking forward to that. But first, I want to say thank you to one of the organisations that's been supporting OxGVC, both this year and in our previous year in 2020. That is the Oxford University Museum of Natural History, without whom this event would not happen. They have been great supporters of this virtual conference, both when we started it up during the pandemic and now in its continuing form. Obviously, there are many benefits to meeting online, including bringing people together from all around the world. We have people joining OxGVC from more than 70 different countries. But the sad side of that is you don't get to see the wonderful building that is the Oxford University Museum of Natural History. So we thought we'd play a quick video so you can get to see a little bit about what the Oxford University Museum of Natural History is all about.
Woof! Just look at this place. This is such a good-looking natural history museum that Vienna and London wanted one of their own when they saw it. Intrigued? Stay tuned for killer roofs, rebel art, and bear whales. Yeah, I just said bear whales. Oh, and if you didn't know we were world-leading, here are some more amazing hidden secrets about the architecture of Oxford University Museum of Natural History, our beloved dodo home. What's this? These tucked-away curious carvings gently mock Darwin's just-published theory of evolution. How could a bear evolve into a whale? This is satire set in stone, which is awkward because the powers that be changed their mind, saw Darwin was right, and by 1899 put up this statue of him. Let's reverse a bit. Pre-bear whales, the museum was built at a time when science was seen as a way of understanding God's creation, hence this lovely angel hidden in plain sight right at the front door, holding a Bible in one hand and dividing cells in the other. That's cutting-edge science and religious imagery hand in hand. If you're making a cathedral, and they were, you'll want art. The makers hired the finest Irish stonemasons and a group of Bohemian artists known as the Pre-Raphaelites to design and carve meticulous copies of the natural world and sculptures of science in action, making this museum the biggest and best collection of Pre-Raphaelite sculpture in the world. Quite something, huh? You'd think, along with all these sculptures, that the roof would also have been carefully and meticulously planned. But haha! This fantastical roof was actually an experiment made out of those railway materials, iron and glass. Let's not mention that it actually collapsed in its first year. But the pillar of the design philosophy is that the building itself is there to teach you. Every single one of these columns, for example, is made from a different type of stone, lugged up to Oxford from all over the British Isles. This is a building that has geological teaching catalogues built into its very fabric. And on top of the pillars, an encyclopedia of plant carvings. And on top of these pillars, wrought ironwork of more species. So, you thought that this museum was a place to see dinosaurs, cabinets of things, and insects, right? But even if we hid all that stuff away, you wouldn't be able to escape learning about the natural world. This isn't a shed for specimens, it's an audacious building that actually teaches you as you walk through it. A world first. And it all starts by looking up. Just mind the pillars.
There you go. And of course, you are more than welcome to visit the website of the OUMNH, the Oxford University Museum of Natural History, where you can find more about both the collections, which include more than 6 million individual objects, which you are welcome to come and research, or indeed just pop by on your next visit to Oxford. We would love to have you visit us here at the Oxford University Museum of Natural History. Now, our other supporting institution is the Charnwood Forest Aspiring UNESCO Global Geopark. This project from Leicestershire in the UK is funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund via the Charnwood Forest Landscape Partnership Scheme. And through 18 projects associated with 18 partners, we are working over a number of years, about 4 years, to hopefully enrich the area, conserve this area's important geological heritage, and use it for the purposes of education and sustainable geotourism development. Now, the hope is at the end of that, an application will go in to become a UNESCO Global Geopark. But to learn a little bit more, here's a quick video made by one of our partners, Charnwood Borough Council.
It's time to discover Charnwood. Perfectly located right in the centre of the country and enjoying superb transport links, there is no better place to visit, work and live. For nearly 600 million years, the powerful forces of nature have been sculpting our breathtaking landscapes. Evidence of our unique geological history is scattered among picturesque villages and can be experienced up close in the rocks of Bradgate Park and Beacon Hill. Such is the importance of Charnwood Forest, it is now an aspiring UNESCO Global Geopark. At the heart of this dramatic landscape is the dynamic university and market town of Loughborough, home to the last major bell foundry in the UK, 800-year-old markets and the Great Central Heritage Railway. In Charnwood, we are proud of our past and excited for our future. Our award-winning Loughborough University and cutting-edge science and enterprise parks are leading world-class research, innovation and sport, and nurturing the stars and heroes of future generations. Discover Charnwood, a fascinating destination promising a non-stop voyage from ancient origins to future potential. In Charnwood, we are shaping tomorrow's world today.
Now, as exciting as these meetings are, bringing us all together virtually from around the world, of course, it would be much better if we could all be together in person, and indeed in person, looking at some rocks and learning about geoheritage, geoconservation, geodiversity, and all the other wonderful topics. And so I am pleased to say that we are in discussions with ProGeo, the International Association for the Conservation of Geological Heritage, to host the next international symposium in Charnwood Forest. So more information on that when it all gets confirmed, but we are very much looking forward to hopefully inviting you all to Charnwood Forest, an aspiring UNESCO Global Geopark, to host the next international symposium for the conservation of geological heritage next year. Stay tuned to announcements and emails for that. But just before we get to our talk from Richard Butler, who's going to talk to us about the conservation of a dinosaur trackway in Dorset on the south coast of the UK. Just want to remind everyone that, of course, when we met 2 years ago, we had a declaration calling for an International Geodiversity Day, and that's had rather a lot of success in that UNESCO has declared it now. And October the 6th will be that day, and we're hoping you're all planning events for that. You can go to geodiversityday.org to find out more, but if you're not quite sure why geodiversity is important, perhaps this quick video from Professor Ian Stewart might tell you why.
Men will be taught that beneath and behind all the outward beauty of our lowlands, our uplands and our highlands, there lies an inner history which, when revealed, will give beauty a fuller significance and an added charm. Archibald Geekie, Landscape and Literature, 1905. Our planet is such a special place, enlivened by an incredible ecological richness of fauna and flora. But the accelerating loss of natural habitat and species mean that biodiversity is on everyone's lips. And yet, underpinning biodiversity is its hidden silent partner, geodiversity. The basis of every ecosystem are the non-living elements of nature: rocks, minerals and soils, and landforms and topography, mountains, gorges, rivers and lakes. This geodiversity has its own intrinsic value, worthy of protection. And it has an essential role for the human planet. It provides the building stones for our towns and cities. And it provides the material for our energy resources, including renewable energy. So as well as underpinning biodiversity, geodiversity underpins human diversity. It's the bedrock of our national and cultural identity. The foundations of Mother Earth, our common home.
Thank you also to the University of Plymouth, the University of Nottingham and the UNESCO Executive Secretariat who supported the creation of that video. If you'd like to be involved in Geodiversity Day, it's open to everyone. Organise an event around the world or in your community. It doesn't matter how big it is. We want to celebrate this important concept and this important area of nature that's been forgotten for too long. So do go along to geodiversityday.org to find out more about how you can be involved in this international celebration on October the 6th every single year. And perhaps if you've got any ideas for a declaration this year from this year's OxGVC, why not start the debate on our Discord server? I think at that point, I've padded enough time and I will hand back to our wonderful chair for today, Lucy, who will guide us through the two remaining talks. Thank you, Lucy, and I will disappear at that point.
Okay, so thank you, Jack. And I will invite Richard Butler, who will present a contribution evaluating the condition and use and future of the UK's largest dinosaur track site at Spyway Quarry in Dorset. So you can begin with your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. Yes, I'm going to be talking about work that we've been doing in Dorset on the dinosaur track site. This is really work that's been cooked up by myself and my collaborator, Kirsty Edgar at the University of Birmingham. We've been working with a number of students at Birmingham as well. So Luke Mead is a final year PhD student at Birmingham. Harry Jones and Lewis Hawler have been working on this as undergraduate projects as part of their paleontology degrees. And then we're also partnering in this work with Sam Scriven and Chris Weedman of the Jurassic Coast Trust. So the dinosaur quarry track site that I'm going to be talking about today is called Spyway Quarry. It's on the south coast of England in Dorset, and it's at the east end of the world famous Jurassic Coast World Heritage Site. It's set a few miles inland from the coast, in an area that is extensively quarried historically and today for rocks from the Purbeck Group. And Purbeck Group is a series of rocks that span the latest Jurassic to earliest Cretaceous. The group includes two formations, and the Spyway Quarry falls within the Durlston Formation, and specifically within the Stair Hall member of that formation. Rocks from the Purbeck Limestone Group have been quarried for many hundreds of years, and they have been incorporated into many historic buildings across the south of England and beyond, including Corfe Castle, shown here, which is close to the Spyway track site. So the history of this track site, it was discovered in the late 1990s by local quarry workers, Kevin Keats and Trev Haysom. It is on National Trust owned land, and so the National Trust commissioned Joe Wright, a paleontologist, to complete a scientific and geoconservation report about the site in 1998. That is an unpublished internal report. It's not widely available, but that provides a scientific description of the site and also recommendations for how that site might be protected and used in future. The site was then actually reburied for more than a decade, and then reopened in 2013 by the National Trust. And they, at that point, were working in consultation with the Jurassic Coast Trust. This is, although it's set inland from the coast, it does form part of the Jurassic Coast World Heritage Site, as to how that site should be used in future. So one of the things that was done when the site was reopened was that in 2014, a very detailed, comprehensive photogrammetric model of the site was made. And there was some details of this published a couple of years back. This is available on Sketchfab. So you can see a whole model of the site. You can also see models of individual footprints. And the idea behind this was to create a permanent document of the site as it was when it was reopened, to make it accessible globally to the public, but also to allow future monitoring of the site. And this decision was made to basically allow public, pretty much unrestricted access to the site. So it's opened to the site in 2013, and there's, as I'll show you on subsequent slides, there's relatively minimal conservation measures, and that was a purposeful decision to allow the public to actually access the main track surface. So it is a site that is highlighted on the Jurassic Coast Trust's website and on the National Trust website. It is completely open to the public, so public can go into the quarry, you can walk over the track surface. It's open 24 hours a day, so it's not really restricted at all. There is a fence around the edge of the quarry, and that is primarily to keep livestock out. And there is some maintenance that is done on an annual basis by the National Trust, such as using herbicide to keep the weeds down. But otherwise, as you can see, there is access to the public to the site. And that was done really to allow the public to experience the site, which was believed not to have a particularly high scientific value. And I'll talk a bit more about why that was thought to be the case. But this is the largest dinosaur footprint site in the UK. So this is what the site looks like from the access route to the site looks like. So it's set just off a very popular walking route, the Priest's Way. It's not particularly well signposted, and again, that's a conscious decision So it is signposted, but there's not a huge amount of promotion that's done for it. But you can see a sign on the gate here saying dinosaur tracks, and there's another sign that you can't quite see in the image here. You walk across the field, and this is what the track site looks like. The quarry is about 30 to 40 meters across. There is a small information panel. My colleague Kirsty Edgar is standing towards the back of the quarry in this image. A small information panel which gives some information on the site. The footprints at this site are made by a particular group of dinosaurs called sauropodomorphs or sauropod dinosaurs. These are the gigantic, long-necked, long-tailed herbivorous dinosaurs, plant-eating dinosaurs. And this is what the tracks look like. So there's about 100 footprints on this surface. They generally have this rather featureless bowl-like appearance. So they are generally these bowl-like depressions on the surface, not a huge amount of morphology, not necessarily particularly well preserved. In general, we don't see them forming distinct trackways. And this is one of the reasons that the site hasn't been thought to have a huge scientific value, because we tend to have this track scattered over the surface, not forming distinct trackways that we might be able to use to infer things about behavior or speed. In some places, there are, as seen on the left of the slide here, there do appear to be several tracks in a line, and those might represent trackways, but it's very difficult to be certain. Most of these tracks are somewhere in the region of 50 to 80 centimeters across. They appear to represent the hind feet, the pes, but in some cases, as you can see on the right side of the screen here, we have a larger pes track and what appears to be possibly a smaller manus track, a 4-foot track next to one another. But again, that's quite unusual. We don't see much of that over the surface. It's also thought that these tracks are under tracks, so they're not. We're not seeing the original track surface here. We're seeing tracks that have been transmitted through to a lower layer within the surface. So for all of these reasons, the scientific value of the site was not considered to be that great, although it's the largest dinosaur track site in the UK. And thus it was deemed to have perhaps more value as a kind of a cultural heritage site for people to visit and actually have the experience of walking on the original or near to the original surface that dinosaurs walked 150 million years ago. This is what the site might have looked like in the very earliest Cretaceous when it was formed. So this is a reconstruction that we had commissioned recently by the paleoartist Mark Whitten. So that generally the track makers are interpreted as being brachiosaurid sauropods. So some of these really gigantic long-necked dinosaurs. And the environment is interpreted as being a beach-type deposit, which is typical for the kind of environments we find in the Purbeck group. So we started really looking at this site really as a lockdown project, a result of COVID. So we've been taking students out for a number of years, and when the first lockdowns happened in 2020, we were looking to establish some virtual fieldwork activities for our students. This led us to visit Spyway again as restrictions eased and to start to build some virtual teaching activities. And we started to think about some research questions that we could conduct here. And there were two questions we were really interested in addressing. One is the scientific value of the site. As I mentioned, it was studied in 1998, but that was never really published. There's no published description of the site. And second, and the thing I want to talk in more detail about today, is how the site's changed since it was open to the public in 2016. So our approach to the second question has been to create new digital models of the site in a very similar way to those that which was created in 2014, and then to make quantitative comparisons between the 2014 model and the models that we've made in 2020 and 2021. So myself and Kirsty Edgar made a model in 2020, and then our students, Lewis Holler and Harry Jones, made a model last year. And we've been able to compare those directly to one another. They've been made in very similar ways. So they're photogrammetric models using a camera mounted on a raised pole. So this is the model that was created in 2014. It's available, as I said, on Sketchfab, so you can go and check that out if you're interested in it. We've been able to create more refined maps of the surface of the quarry, showing the distribution of the footprints on the surface. So this is work done by Harry Jones. And he's done this for both the 2014 and the 2021 models. And this allows us actually to see that the exposure of the surface has changed over that time. So there are fewer footprints actually exposed today than there were in 2014. And that's because of overgrowth of vegetation and also some mass wasting of the slopes around the edge of the quarry. So we have less of it exposed than we did when this was first opened to the public. We've also created some, using the software cloud comparison, depth maps of the site. So the yellow areas here are kind of the deeper areas of the quarry. So generally that's picking out the footprints. And again, we can use this to see that the number of footprints exposed on the surface has changed over time. And also some of them are less, they're shallower than they were in 2014. And this is partly because material is being washed into these bowl-like footprints and filling in the bases of them. We've also done some work to try and quantify how the site is used by the public. So we installed visitor counters last summer, and we've had those up ever since. So this is work that Harry Jones has been doing to map out how these how visitor numbers have changed through time. As you might predict, as we went through August into the winter, we have a tail off in the numbers of visitors. We have a gap in the data where the sensors are misaligned over December and January. But we can see that in the busiest points of the year, we have something close to 700 visitors a week to this site, so 100 visitors a day. And this is probably, not fully representative of a normal year, because this is obviously a COVID year affected to some extent by lockdowns and restrictions on travel and so on. So this is quite a popular site with quite a lot of visitors going into it. So one of the other things we did to look at this was we installed a GoPro for a day, a particular busy day, and took regular photos of the quarry surface. We then, or Luke Mead, our PhD student, then gridded the surface and counted the numbers of visitors in different parts of the surface through that day. And this allowed us to create a heat map of the quarry surface, showing where visitors are most commonly go on that surface. So the yellower areas here are the most popular areas in the surface. There is an area towards the bottom left of the screen here, which is where most visitors went, and that's where the information board was. But this also shows us that then visitors tend to focus on a few areas of the quarry. Those are areas where there are particularly prominent footprints or groups of footprints that are particularly obvious. And you can see how visitors move across the surface as they visit the site. The other thing that we looked at was that the surface of this quarry is very intensively fractured by natural jointing processes. And we used a MATLAB package called FracPack to quantify the distribution and the density of these fractures across the surface. And this is shown here. So darker colors indicate greater density of fracturing, and you can see that it is quite variable across the surface, and particular areas tend to be breaking up more as a result of these natural jointing processes. And these actually coincide with where visitors are generally visiting the surface. The final thing that we did, that Luke did, was to make quantitative comparisons using Cloud Compare between the 2014 and 2021 models. So we aligned the two models, and then you can actually see where material has been removed over time. So the red colors in the image on the left, on the right, which is the 2014 model of a particular footprint, shows where material has been lost between 2014 and 2021. And this has generally been lost along the cracks in the surface and around the edge of the footprint. And it's been lost by material flaking off the surface. So that we can quantitatively demonstrate that these tracks are deteriorating over time. And we can do that over the whole surface. So this is the whole surface. Again, the red shows where material has been lost. And generally, you might just be able to pick out that that's happening where there are cracks and around the edges of the footprints. It's happening where there are cracks because the surface is flaking away. It's happening around the edge of the footprints because of natural weathering, where those rims of the footprints are wearing down over time. And we can see that if we look at this, is my final image of one of these footprints. You can see that over time the rock is weathered to a dark grey, but in some places where it's flaked away, it has a yellow colour. So we can see where the rock is actually flaking away and where we're losing the definition of footprints on the surface. So to finalise and to just sum up very quickly, this site receives substantial visitor numbers, 100 people or more a day in the busiest months. We've been able to demonstrate quantitatively that over the last 8 years, the tracks have become less distinct and suffered damage. Some are no longer accessible, and some you actually can't identify anymore. Most of this damage appears to relate to natural fracturing and flaking of the surface as caused by natural weathering and joints. You could potentially deal with this by trying to cover the site. It's probably not affordable or desirable to do that. So this is something that needs to be taken into account in future site management plans about how we balance the management of these kind of impacts with this desire to continue to allow people to access the site and to have the experience of actually physically walking in the footprints of dinosaurs. And I'll finish there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the speech, and we are on time. So I will invite the last speaker of this session is Debbie Sturm, and the contribution is entitled Reimagining Place, Study Abroad Experience on Heritage, Story and Restoration.
Okay.
So the stage is yours, and you can begin with your presentation.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody. I'm really delighted to be here. My name is Dr. Debbie Sturm. I am a professor at James Madison University in the US. I am presenting today on Reimagining Place, a study abroad experience on heritage, story, and restoration. So just a little bit of a background. I'm actually sort of an odd guest to have, I think. I am a professor of counseling. So I'm a mental health professional, I'm a licensed professional counselor, and most of my work is on climate change and mental health, place attachment, environmental advocacy, trauma, and really the emotional side of the sciences. So I always feel very grateful and privileged to be in a space with all of you. I was one of those girls who was always told that science was not for you. And so I really believe that sort of bringing the psychological aspect to this is where my heart is. My heritage is Scottish, Welsh, and Maltese. So I'm really drawn to places and stories that connect to me. Again, I'm really a believer in sense of place and place attachment. And I spent a week at the Eden Project a couple years ago and was really moved by some of the experiences that I had there in a women's leadership retreat. And that brought me to sort of how I ended up here today. I wanted to introduce you to an experience that we had in the spring of 2020. Of course, that time period is also very significant. Bringing U.S. students to Cornwall for an environmental legacy of Southwest England study abroad. It was a spring break study abroad. So we had about 11 days total, ideally. And so that's another story. But we, let's see. So the purpose of this was to really help students connect not only just the really interesting story of Cornwall and Cornwall's environmental and particularly the mining legacy, but also to start connecting to their own aspirations of how to make a difference in their own community. The course itself, our environmental courses tend to have some very primary significant goals of looking at the interaction between social and physical aspects of the environment, political, economic, and sociological consequences, collaborating across disciplines, being able to understand the history of people and places and environment, and to really synthesize that into something that changes how they think about how they can make a difference in the world. My involvement here really brought the secondary course objectives to life, and that was to help students discover a curiosity for the story of a place. That if they can, no matter where they are or what type of work they're doing, connect to the story of a place, then perhaps they can see the value in all places. They can understand that there are generations of stories that contributed to how and why a place is the way it is. And then they can imagine ways to restore, reclaim, rehabilitate places that honor history, heritage, people, and nature. And we want them to have just a real holistic view and to not just settle for what's on the surface, but to look back and say, like, how did this place come to be? Who held the story here? Whose story is being told and whose story is not being told? And to make these the guiding principles in how they view their own environment and their own community. I've done a number of study abroads. I typically have taken students to Malta for environmental advocacy work. And what I've noticed time and again is that when students are in a new place, they have a sense of awe. They have a full sensory experience of something completely different, and they feel it under a little bit of stress because they just don't know how to act, where to be, what to do. And so the emotional piece of it is quite accessible. It's already available to them. And then if I can sort of help them channel that into curiosity and reverence, perhaps it will stick a little bit longer. So again, we took this sort of, my teaching partner is a geologist. So we took what was initially a geology-based field study and turned it into a much more sort of holistic, identity-based, place reverent experience for the students that could help transform how they see their work in the future. A theme that sort of sat beneath it all was, what do you do with a hole in the ground? And that came a lot from my experience during the retreat at the Eden Project. And I thought about that for a long time prior to this study abroad, because it felt really inspiring to me that we could look at things differently. And then we could start to imagine, like, how can we make a genuine difference in our communities and things that we thought were broken or damaged or unsightly? Could we bring it to life in a different way? So we covered things anywhere from mining and minerals over human history to sense of place and the mining culture, including legends, pirates, smugglers, and wreckers. We looked at energy production and sort of the relationship that we've had to that over time and the things that we've chosen to do with our environment in order to achieve that. We spent time with ecological grief and trauma and really the psychology and the culture of extracted landscapes. We are located in Virginia, which means we are in really close proximity to a lot of extraction practices. And it felt really accessible and palpable to the students because these were things that they could see and experience within 30 minutes to 2 hours to 3 hours from where we lived. We also looked at ancient environments and how things change over time. And then this little book that I found called 101 Uses for a Hole in the Ground really launched our conversations about restoration and reclamation. So again, it was about getting students to think differently. Our itinerary included Salisbury. We spent some time in Portland and met with, I just want to get his name correct because he was wonderful, Seb Brook, who took us to the proposed site for the Memo project. We went to the Jurassic Coast and we learned about Mary Anning. We spent some time at the Eden Project, Halligan Gardens, and then we spent a significant chunk of time on the Tin Coast and had some lovely conversations with people from the National Trust on the coldest, rainiest day ever, over tea and wonderful biscuits, and it was amazing. And I just wanted to add that we had 12 students who went with us. Almost all of them were not environmental or science majors. They were a complete interdisciplinary group. We initially had 11 days planned. In the middle of our trip was when then President Trump made the announcement that he was closing down travel to Europe. So we did have to come home a little bit early in a very dramatic exit. So that being said, a lot of what I brought to the conversation with the students was this idea of place and place attachment, and that how our own identities are woven into the places that are part of our families, our histories, our stories, and that place attachment also covers generations, and that sometimes the story of people and places is not told, or sometimes their story is told by others. And so understanding how place attachment, place identity, how it's woven into who you are is really critical to understanding what we even do or propose or imagine for places. This is connected to topophilia, which is the love or emotional connection with place. And the bottom line, that place becomes part of your identity individually and collectively. Of course, I'm in Virginia, where we have a very long history of enslaved Africans, and then also a lot of harm to indigenous populations here. So thinking about place also means who are the people who did not have a chance to tell their story, or whose stories may have been erased. And so as we're looking at place attachment, we have to also be aware of whose story has been neglected at best. We also spent time talking about ecological grief and the reality that, if we love a place, we also mourn for a place. And that grief is complex, that grief is not just about the loss of a place, but it's also about seeing harm. And I think for any of you who have lost someone significant in your life, you also realize that grief has a very interesting experience of loss, healing, beauty, sadness. It's very complex. And it's something that is important to sort of hold on to as we examine our relationship to place over time. I shared with the students a number of photographs, and this is from, I want to give credit where it's due. Tom Hegan has an incredible series of photographs that capture, I think, a little bit of ecological grief in extractive processes and other sort of other mining practices, just about how lovely these photographs are, how striking, how awe-inspiring. And yet when you're able to really settle into the sort of the harm and the pain and the loss, it really illustrates some of the complexity of our relationship to the natural world and to how we've, again, related or utilized the natural world for our own comfort and our own progression. And I shared that with the students so that they could really tap into the emotional experience and the complexity of our relationship to the natural world. We also tapped into the reality of place and culture, recognizing that all places, again, have a story, and that it's important that we pay attention to how concepts of race and power and citizenship and all sorts of elements like that have played into places over time, have shaped their identity, the narrative, the value of a place, the value of people in a place, whose voices matter, whose don't. How do you restore a place that honors that? How do you protect a place that honors these aspects too of culture? And a brief example that I'll give you is we have a place called the Great Dismal Swamp in Virginia. And historically, and again, if you talk about sort of erased narratives, historically, freed and escaped enslaved people in the South, as well as a number of indigenous communities, found refuge in sort of the far-reaching aspects of the Great Dismal Swamp. And at the same time, there are aspects of it on sort of the western side that are very heavily used for recreation, have more privileged aspect to it. And so the history of the Great Dismal Swamp can often be lost in sort of the recreational piece. And then we want students to be able to uncover everything and really pay attention. And so this leads us to like basically their sort of final takeaway is that we wanted students to then envision, how could you imagine in your local community or somewhere in the US, cultural landscapes that are really attuned to communities, that are attuned to story, that are attuned to narrative, and how can you look for ways in these four primary ways of treating to preserve, to rehabilitate, to restore, or reconstruct. So we're really enhancing their critical thinking about place and about what do we do with places that have been harmed or damaged, and how do we bring story, how do we bring meaning, how do we bring culture and history and heritage while also honoring nature. And this kind of work requires challenging narratives, acknowledging and addressing the harm that has happened, whether it's ecologically or to humans, repairing relationships over time, building a new future. I think some of the things that are harder to combat that the folks when we were visiting the mines were telling us is just this authenticity, humility, reciprocity, and bravery. Things like that can certainly slow down your process because they take time. It's about relationship. It's about repairing. It's about courage in narratives and in connections. And so I'll wrap up really quickly. This goes so fast. Is just the whole takeaway for us and really developing this aspect of the students was that they would understand the value of incorporating sense of place and place attachment into decisions they make within their community. That they also understand the importance of psychologically being engaged to work around, when you're working around geoheritage, cultural landscape, that there's an emotional, a long history of emotional connection to places. The story is exceptionally personal and it's woven into the fabric literally of generations. It sits in our DNA from generations past, and that preserving story and restoring must occur in community with patience, courage, listening, and reverence. So I think I just hit the time perfectly.
So thank you very much for your nice presentation.
Thank you.
And now we have time for question, 10 minutes. So I will begin to read some comments. The first one is from Rosangela Botelu. Carol, it's for Carol. And sorry, I ask all the presenters to connect. Add to stream. Carol. Okay, thanks. So the first comment is from Rosangela Botello. Carol, in fact, in this approach, is very common and useful in the case of soils. What do you think? So that's a rather question or comment if you want to react somehow.
Yeah, sure, there is. We are convinced that there are a lot of steps in learning that are embodied. And that's exactly our main point. Earth science, in a particular way, different to another disciplines, offers the possibility to interact with body sensation, movement, and effects in a very special way. Because we are like always touching, like always moving, like always feeling, being impressed, everything that. So we are sure that if education can see the whole potential of embodied education and the need of pedagogical practices systematization taken in account a rigorous and conscious way, the actual possibility to learn with our bodies, it could be an important input for the development of the practical pedagogics implementation. Thank you for your question.
Okay, thank you. And next comment is from Cardoso Bande. And it says, thank you, Fabio, for excellent presentation. And I would like to know what is the position or opinion of government in relation to extraction of lithium. So that's a question for Fabio.
Okay, thank you. So in regards to the question, so the government is moving forward with these areas for the prospection and then future possible mining sites. They are approaching other alternatives, but this lithium question is still moving forward. So that's why this intervention was important to ensure that especially the UNESCO designated areas were left out of this possible future, let's say.
Okay, thank you. And we will move to another comment. It's from Leslie Dunlop. Regarding the lithium pegmatites, I remember about 15 to 20 years ago, they were having difficulty finding a use for some of them and trying to make floor tiles, etc. Now it is an important resource. So that's just a comment from Leslie Dunlop. And if you want to react somehow, what is your experience or?
Yeah, I saw. Yeah, it was more of a comment than a question. Probably before, so the need for lithium was not so big, so the search was not so big. That's why it was not so active. But nowadays, with the use of the lithium and the search for electric cars. That's why it's becoming more interesting, let's say, and the prospection and the research has been greater than in the past.
Okay, thanks. Another question is from Steven Semken. Oh, sorry, I have to. A question again for Carol Guerra. In your research on terminology and the research literature related to geoeducation, did you consider the terms informal education, free choice education, and interpretation? I can only speak for the USA, but many on-ground educators in geoheritage and cultural heritage places here identify themselves as interpreters. And there is a body of research in these fields that connects closely to formal geoscience education research. So if you, it's a question about if you consider the different terms, like informal education, free choice education, and interpretation.
Well, actually, we didn't. We have not considered those terms specifically, but we discussed a little bit about the first and the second one. We did not take in account informal education because it's a field particularly hard to approach. Informal education refers to almost every learning act we learn during our lives, almost every skill that you learn without almost any mediation. Informal education does not require a mediated pedagogical approach, and our interest is completely related with mediated pedagogical approaches. However, we are totally concerned by no formal education, and we think education, just like you say, implies a lot of no formal education that is quite different to informal. I like to make that precision. We didn't use that exact terms in the research because it begins to be like quite ambiguous, and we wanted to see what there was exactly in the education terms. But I am really thankful because I have never heard about this approach of interpreters, and I think it could be really, really interesting to look out for it in this sense, and we will totally look for it. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. There is another comment from Jonathan Larwood. It's for Richard, I suppose. I wonder if Alderley trackway site in Oxfordshire is larger but not exposed.
Yeah, it's a good point. So Ardley trackway site is not accessible at present. It's covered. It could possibly be a larger site. I guess I should have said that Spyway is the largest accessible site in the UK. So there may be others, but also the surface at Spyway probably. So there are other. It's probably a larger horizon that extends into other quarries. So it's been discovered in other quarries nearby, probably the same surface or a very similar surface. So it might be they're only seeing a portion of a much larger original trackway surface as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And another question is from Steven Semken for Debbie. Did you observe changes of growth in students' senses of place, either place attachment, or place meaning, or both, for the study region as a result of the field experiences?
Thank you. Yeah, Stephen, it's interesting because we had such a short period of time, but it was also really intense. And so I think part of what we experienced with the students is that by introducing these conversations early, it got them ready to anticipate, like, I'm going to have a connection to a place. It gave them the language and sort of the sort of emotional intelligence to connect to places. Again, we were there 5 or 6 days before we got evacuated, but I have experienced multiple study abroads in the past where I've worked really hard to incorporate sense of place attachment, attunement to story and heritage, and the students do connect significantly. I think the bottom line is, like, if you introduce that, you increase the likelihood that they have sort of the conceptual framework to integrate that themselves. I think if you don't bring up the emotional connection and the sense of place, they're not sure how to express it. So including that in the pre-departure, including that in the curriculum, definitely increases their odds of having a sense of connection to a place and integrating it into who they are.
Okay, thank you. And I think we have time for one quick question from Jack Matthews to Richard, who says, excellent work. Do you have any sense over whether footwear abrasion might be playing a role in the degradation of the trackside? So just a short question.
Yeah, I think it's possible. I think what our results suggest is that the major factor is the pre-existing jointing of the surface, which is concentrating weathering processes, and also vegetation grows preferentially in those joints and so on. But it doesn't mean that the access of humans to the surface, people walking on the surface, isn't also causing some degradation. But I think a bit difficult to unpick the two completely.
Okay, so I would like to close this session and thank all the speakers and all the people who listened. And tomorrow we will see in session 5. There will be long talks and then some short talk in session 6. And remember that there is also a poster session after the 2 sessions. So thank you again and see you tomorrow. Have a nice evening. Bye.